I've been here before. These trees, the birds, the very soil, it's all familiar, like a long-forgotten home. Every step feels like a memory, a past life replaying itself in my mind. But why do I feel like I'm reliving something that shouldn't be remembered? The dense canopy overhead filtered the sunlight into dim patches that barely illuminated the forest floor. Each step I took seemed to be swallowed by the thick carpet of fallen leaves, the silence so profound that it felt as though the world had stopped breathing. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, a reminder that this forest was ancient, older than the maps that had brought me here, older than the myths that whispered of its existence. I had been drawn to this place by stories, rumors passed down through generations, warnings of a place where the trees whispered secrets and the shadows moved on their own. Most dismissed these tales as superstition, the remnants of a time when the world was less understood. But something in those stories had spoken to me, called out to a part of me that I had long forgotten. The entrance to the forest had been unremarkable, just another stretch of dense undergrowth at the edge of civilization. But as I crossed the threshold, something shifted. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. It was as though the forest had its own rules, its own way of being that defied the outside world. For hours, I had walked in silence, the only sounds the rustle of leaves beneath my boots and the occasional snap of a twig. There were no birds, no insects, just the endless stretch of trees that seemed to close in around me the deeper I went. It was easy to lose track of time in a place like this, where the sun barely penetrated the thick canopy and the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. And then, I heard it, the first sign that I was not alone. A whisper, so faint that I thought it might be the wind. But there was no breeze, no movement in the air. The sound was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the silence that surrounded it, yet it sent a chill down my spine. I stopped, straining to hear it again, to catch the words that seemed to hover just out of reach. There it was again, soft, insistent, like a voice carried on the breath of the trees. I turned slowly, scanning the forest for any sign of life, but saw nothing. The trees stood silent, their trunks thick and ancient, their branches twisted into shapes that defied explanation. But the whisper persisted, growing louder, more distinct. It was coming from deeper within the forest, a voice that beckoned me forward, urging me to follow. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave this place before I lost myself in its depths. But curiosity, or perhaps something more, pushed me onward. As I moved deeper into the forest, the whisper became clearer, more insistent. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, something that felt as though it was watching me, guiding me. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching out like fingers, as though trying to touch me, to pull me further in. I followed the voice, each step taking me further from the world I knew, deeper into a place that felt alive with its own ancient will. The forest seemed to shift around me, the path ahead twisting and turning in ways that made no sense, as though the ground itself was trying to disorient me, to make me lose my way. But I couldn't stop. The voice was calling to me, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet see, but felt in every fiber of my being. It was as though the forest had awakened, its secrets stirring beneath the surface, waiting for someone to discover them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whisper stopped. I found myself standing in a small clearing, the trees forming a perfect circle around me. The ground here was different, bare, as though nothing had grown here for centuries. In the center of the clearing stood a single, massive tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, its roots spreading out like the veins of some ancient creature. The tree was older than the forest around it, older than anything I had ever seen. Its bark was dark, almost black, and covered in strange, intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. The air around it was thick with a sense of something powerful, something that had been waiting here for a very long time. As I approached the tree, I felt a sense of dread settle over me, a feeling that whatever lay within this forest was not meant to be disturbed. But it was too late to turn back now. I had come this far, and whatever secrets this forest held, I was determined to uncover them. I reached out, my hand hovering just above the surface of the tree, the carvings glowing faintly in the dim light. The moment my fingers brushed the bark, a shock of cold ran through me, as though the tree itself was alive, reacting to my touch. And then, the whisper returned louder this time, more insistent, filling my mind with words I couldn't understand, but felt deep within my soul. The forest around me seemed to come alive, the trees swaying in a wind that wasn't there, the shadows shifting and twisting in ways that made my head spin. I pulled my hand back, stumbling away from the tree, but the whisper followed me, growing louder, more intense. The carvings on the tree began to glow brighter, the light pulsing in time with the beat of my heart, as though the forest itself was alive, connected to me in some unfathomable way. Panic set in, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I tried to find my way out of the clearing, back to the safety of the world outside this cursed place. But the forest wouldn't let me go. The trees closed in around me, the path I had taken disappearing before my eyes, leaving me trapped in a place that was no longer just a forest, but something far older, far more dangerous. And in that moment, I realized the truth: this was no ordinary forest. It was a prison, a place where something ancient and malevolent had been trapped for eons, waiting for someone to awaken it. And I had done just that. The clearing seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the air thick with a sense of foreboding that clung to my skin like a cold mist. I stood there, frozen in place, as the whispering grew louder, swirling around me in a maddening chorus of voices that I couldn't fully comprehend. It was as if the forest itself was alive, speaking in a language that transcended words, a language of ancient memories and forgotten nightmares. My breath hitched as I forced myself to turn away from the twisted tree at the center of the clearing. I needed to leave, to escape the grasp of whatever malevolent force had been awakened by my presence. But the forest had changed. The path I had followed was gone, swallowed by the shifting shadows and gnarled roots that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Every direction looked the same, an endless maze of twisted trees and darkness that seemed to close in on me with every passing second. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind, but I knew that giving in to fear would only hasten my demise. I had to stay calm, to think clearly, despite the growing sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I searched for any sign of the path I had taken. But there was nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no trace of my journey. It was as if the forest had erased my existence, leaving me stranded in a place where time itself seemed to have lost all meaning. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to guide me, or perhaps lure me deeper into the heart of the forest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. The sensation was unnerving, a constant prickling at the back of my neck that made my skin crawl. And then, I saw it, a faint glimmer of light in the distance, barely visible through the thick tangle of branches and undergrowth. It was the first sign of anything beyond the oppressive darkness that surrounded me, and I knew I had to follow it, no matter where it led. I pushed forward, my steps tentative but determined, as I made my way through the dense forest. The light grew brighter as I approached, casting long shadows that danced and flickered in the corners of my vision. The trees seemed to part before me, revealing a narrow, winding path that I hadn't noticed before. The path led me deeper into the forest, the light guiding me like a beacon in the darkness. The whispering voices continued to echo in my mind, but they were softer now, almost gentle, as if they were urging me onward. There was something comforting in their tone, a strange familiarity that made me feel as though I was being welcomed, rather than hunted. As I walked, the trees around me began to change. The gnarled, twisted trunks gave way to smoother, more elegant forms, their branches arching gracefully overhead like the vaulted ceilings of an ancient cathedral. The light grew stronger, bathing the path in a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then, I saw it, a structure, half hidden in the shadows at the edge of the path. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a seamless blend of natural and artificial, as if it had grown from the very earth itself. The walls were smooth and polished, covered in intricate carvings that glowed faintly with the same eerie light that filled the forest. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached out to touch the surface of the structure. The carvings were cold beneath my fingers, their patterns complex and indecipherable, like the language of a forgotten civilization. As I traced the lines, the whispering voices grew louder, filling my mind with fragmented images and sensations that I couldn't fully grasp. Suddenly, the carvings pulsed with light, and the door before me slid open with a soft hiss. The sound echoed in the stillness, a stark reminder that this place was far from abandoned. Whatever lay beyond that door, it was waiting for me. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But something deeper, something primal, urged me forward. This was why I had come here, why the forest had called to me. The answers I sought were beyond that door, hidden within the heart of this ancient structure. I stepped inside, the door sliding shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach churn. The air was cool and dry, a stark contrast to the damp, earthy scent of the forest. The walls glowed faintly with the same light that had guided me, casting long shadows that danced and twisted in the corners of the room. The chamber was vast, its ceiling high and arched, supported by columns that seemed to grow out of the ground like the roots of a great tree. The floor was smooth and polished, reflecting the faint light in a way that made it seem almost liquid. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it, a large, ornate chest, its surface covered in the same intricate carvings that adorned the walls. I approached the chest cautiously, the whispering voices growing louder with each step. They were no longer the soft, gentle murmurs that had guided me through the forest. They were frantic, urgent, as if they were trying to warn me of something I couldn't see. My hand hovered over the chest, hesitating for just a moment before I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of dark velvet, was a small, glowing orb, its surface smooth and flawless, radiating a soft, pulsating light. The moment I touched it, a shock of energy coursed through me, filling my mind with images and memories that weren't my own. I staggered back, the orb clutched tightly in my hand as the chamber around me seemed to come alive. The walls pulsed with light, the carvings shifting and writhing as if they were alive, the columns groaning as the entire structure began to shake. The whispering voices reached a fever pitch, their words jumbled and chaotic, but one message clear above the rest. You are not alone. The orb's pulsating glow cast flickering shadows across the chamber walls, the intricate carvings seeming to shift and dance in the dim light. My heart raced as I stared at the small, enigmatic object in my hand, its surface smooth and cool against my skin. The images and memories that had flooded my mind when I first touched it were still there, lingering at the edges of my consciousness, but I couldn't fully grasp them, like fragments of a dream slipping away upon waking. The structure around me continued to tremble, the columns groaning as if under immense strain. The whispering voices, once soft and almost soothing, had grown frantic, their words overlapping in a chaotic cacophony that sent chills down my spine. They were no longer just voices, they were presences, ancient and powerful, and I could feel them watching me, assessing me. I tightened my grip on the orb, trying to steady my breathing as I backed away from the pedestal. The chamber seemed to close in around me, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. I knew I needed to leave, to escape whatever force had been awakened by my intrusion, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, as if the structure itself was holding me in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The chamber fell silent, the whispering voices fading into an eerie stillness that pressed in on me from all sides. It was as if the entire forest had drawn a collective breath, waiting for something that I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. I forced myself to move, my legs stiff and uncooperative as I stumbled toward the door. The walls seemed to shift and shimmer in the corner of my vision, the carvings twisting into shapes that I couldn't quite make out. It was as if the structure was alive, reacting to the orb in my hand, or perhaps to me. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the dark, winding path that had led me to this place. The ethereal glow that had guided me here was gone, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow the light whole. But I couldn't stay, I needed to find my way back, to escape the grip of this ancient force before it consumed me. As I stepped out into the darkness, the whispering voices returned, softer this time, but more insistent. They weren't just voices, they were memories, echoes of the past that had been imprinted on this place over millennia. I could feel them pressing against my mind, trying to make me see, to understand. The path before me was barely visible, the darkness thick and impenetrable. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. The air was cold, biting into my skin as I moved forward, the orb clutched tightly in my hand. The forest was no longer just a place, it was a presence, alive and aware, watching me with 1,000 unseen eyes. Every step I took felt like a violation, as if I was trespassing on sacred ground, and the whispering voices seemed to agree, their tone shifting from curiosity to something darker, more threatening. As I moved deeper into the forest, the path began to twist and turn in ways that defied logic. The trees seemed to move of their own accord, shifting and reconfiguring themselves to block my way or lead me astray. It was as if the forest was testing me, challenging me to find my way out or to succumb to its will. And then I saw them, the shadows. At first, they were nothing more than fleeting shapes in the corner of my eye, barely distinguishable from the darkness that surrounded me. But as I continued to walk, they grew more distinct, more tangible. They moved with purpose, flitting between the trees, their forms shifting and twisting in ways that made my stomach churn. These were no ordinary shadows, they were something else, something far older and more malevolent. I could feel their gaze on me, cold and unyielding, as they circled closer, their whispering voices growing louder, more insistent. They weren't just watching me, they were guiding me, leading me somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I quickened my pace, the sense of unease growing stronger with every step. The shadows followed, their movements synchronized with my own, as if they were mimicking me, or perhaps trying to communicate with me. But their intentions were unclear, and the fear that gnawed at my insides told me that whatever they wanted, it wasn't to help me. Suddenly, the path opened up into another clearing, smaller than the one before, but just as eerie. The trees here were different, their bark smooth and black, almost reflective, as if they were made of glass. The ground was covered in a thick layer of mist that seemed to pulse with a faint, ghostly light, and in the center of the clearing stood a tall, monolithic structure, its surface covered in the same intricate carvings that adorned the walls of the chamber I had just left. The shadows stopped at the edge of the clearing, their whispering voices falling silent as I stepped forward, drawn to the monolith by a force I couldn't resist. The orb in my hand pulsed in response, its light growing brighter as I approached the structure. And then, as I reached out to touch the monolith, the shadows surged forward, their forms coalescing into a single, towering figure that loomed over me like a specter from another world. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, and the whispering voices returned, louder and more frenzied than before. "Release us," the voices hissed, their words searing into my mind like molten iron. "Set us free." My hand trembled as it hovered over the surface of the monolith, the carvings glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The figure before me seemed to pulse with the same energy, its form shifting and twisting in ways that defied comprehension. I could feel its power, its ancient malice, pressing down on me, suffocating me. But I couldn't pull away. Something deeper, something primal, urged me forward. The orb in my hand pulsed in time with the monolith, their energies intertwined, connected in ways I couldn't understand. And as I placed my hand on the cold, smooth surface, a shock of energy coursed through me, filling my mind with a single, undeniable truth. I was not the first to come here, and I would not be the last. The monolith's cold surface pulsed beneath my hand, the energy coursing through it resonating with the orb still clutched tightly in my grasp. The towering shadow before me seemed to waver, its form shifting in and out of focus, as if it were caught between two worlds. The whispering voices had quieted, but their presence lingered in the air, a constant, oppressive weight that bore down on my thoughts. For a moment, I stood frozen, caught in the grip of something far older and more powerful than I could comprehend. The orb's light flickered, casting strange, twisting shadows on the ground around me. I could feel the ancient entity's gaze upon me, cold and calculating, as if it were measuring my worth, judging whether I was worthy of the truth that lay hidden within the forest. And then, the ground beneath me began to shift. I staggered back as the earth trembled, the mist swirling around my feet as the monolith slowly sank into the ground, revealing a set of stone steps leading downward into the darkness. The figure of shadow remained at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed on me, but it made no move to follow as I approached the steps. A deep sense of dread settled over me, but I knew there was no turning back now. Whatever lay at the bottom of those steps held the key to understanding the forest, to unraveling the mystery of the voices that had haunted me since I first set foot in this place. And perhaps, it held the key to my escape. With a deep breath, I descended the steps, the orb's light guiding my way as I entered the darkness. The walls of the tunnel were lined with more of the intricate carvings I had seen before, their shapes twisting and writhing as the light passed over them. It was as if the very stone was alive, reacting to my presence, or perhaps to the energy of the orb. The air grew colder as I descended, the temperature dropping with each step until my breath hung in the air before me in pale clouds. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the earth, until finally, I emerged into a vast underground chamber. The chamber was unlike anything I had ever seen, a massive, domed space filled with towering columns and ancient machinery, their surfaces covered in the same glowing carvings. At the center of the chamber stood a large, circular platform, surrounded by more of the shadowy figures that had haunted me in the forest above. But these figures were different. They were solid, tangible, their forms wrapped in dark robes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, their eyes glowing with a faint, otherworldly light as they turned to regard me. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I took in the scene before me. The platform in the center of the chamber was clearly some kind of altar, its surface covered in more of the intricate carvings, but there was something different about them, something that set them apart from the others. They were a puzzle, a series of interconnected symbols that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, forming new patterns and shapes that defied explanation. And at the center of the puzzle, embedded in the stone, was a small, circular indentation, the perfect size for the orb in my hand. The shadowy figures watched in silence as I approached the platform, their presence unnerving but not hostile. I could feel their gaze on me, their thoughts brushing against my own, but I couldn't decipher their intentions. They were waiting, watching, as if they had been here for centuries, awaiting the arrival of someone, of me. The orb pulsed in my hand, the light within it growing brighter as I approached the altar. The carvings on the platform seemed to react, shifting and twisting into new shapes that danced across the stone in a dizzying array of patterns. It was a puzzle, one that I knew I had to solve if I was to understand the truth of this place. With trembling hands, I placed the orb in the indentation at the center of the altar. The moment it touched the stone, the carvings flared to life, their light filling the chamber with a blinding brilliance. The ground beneath me trembled, the air thrumming with energy as the puzzle began to shift and change before my eyes. I watched in awe as the symbols rearranged themselves, forming intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The shadows around the altar flickered, their forms wavering as the energy in the chamber grew stronger, more intense. But the puzzle was far from complete. The carvings continued to shift, forming new patterns that seemed to defy logic, their shapes twisting and intertwining in ways that made my head spin. I could feel the ancient entity's presence, stronger now, as if it were guiding me, urging me to solve the puzzle and unlock the secrets of the forest. I reached out, my fingers tracing the carvings as I tried to make sense of the shifting patterns. The symbols seemed to respond to my touch, rearranging themselves into new configurations, each more complex than the last. It was as if the puzzle was testing me, challenging me to see beyond the surface, to understand the deeper truth that lay hidden within the stone. And then, with a sudden clarity, the final piece fell into place. The carvings flared with light, their shapes locking into a final, perfect pattern that seemed to resonate with the very core of my being. The ground beneath me trembled, the air crackling with energy as the orb sank into the stone, its light merging with the carvings in a brilliant, blinding flash. For a moment, everything was silent. The shadows around the altar were still, their forms frozen in place as the light pulsed and throbbed in the heart of the chamber. And then, slowly, the light began to fade, revealing the true form of the altar beneath the carvings. It was a map of the forest, of the ancient entity's domain. The paths and symbols etched into the stone were no longer just abstract shapes, they were markers, guideposts that pointed the way to the heart of the forest, to the source of the voices that had called me here. But the map was more than just a guide, it was a key. A key to understanding the ancient power that had shaped this place, to unlocking the secrets that had been buried here for millennia. And as I studied the map, the truth began to unfold before me, a truth that shook me to my core. The entity in the forest was not just a being, it was a guardian, a sentinel that had been placed here to protect something so ancient and powerful that it defied comprehension. And I had been brought here, not just to uncover the truth, but to make a choice that would determine the fate of the forest, and perhaps of the world beyond. The shadows around me stirred, their forms flickering as the energy in the chamber reached a crescendo. The whispering voices returned, their tone urgent, insistent, as they called out to me, urging me to take the final step, to make the choice that would seal my fate. And as I stood there, the weight of the orb in my hand, I knew that there was no turning back. The choice was mine, and mine alone. And whatever I decided, the forest would never be the same. The chamber fell silent as the light from the map faded, leaving me in the dim glow of the carvings that still pulsed faintly beneath the stone. The shadows around me shifted restlessly, their forms flickering in and out of focus as if they were waiting for something, for me to make a decision, to take the final step that would determine my fate. The orb in my hand felt heavier than ever, its light dimming as if the energy within it was being drained by the ancient force that permeated this place. The map, now etched into my memory, had revealed the true nature of the forest, the purpose of the guardian that watched over it, and the choice that lay before me. I knew now that the entity in the forest was not just a guardian, but a prison warden, a sentinel tasked with keeping something contained, something so ancient and powerful that it had the potential to reshape reality itself. The voices that had called to me, that had guided me here, were the echoes of those who had come before me, those who had faced the same choice and had either failed or chosen to leave the forest unchanged. But I was different. I had been chosen not just to witness, but to act. As I stepped away from the altar, the shadows closed in, their whispering voices growing louder, more insistent. They were no longer just presences, they were beings, sentient and aware, their minds brushing against my own as they tried to influence my thoughts, to sway my decision. "Release us," they whispered, their voices a chorus of longing and desperation. "Set us free." I could feel their desperation, their hunger for freedom, but I also sensed the danger that lay beneath their pleas. The guardian had been placed here for a reason, and the power that it contained was not meant to be unleashed. Yet, there was a part of me that sympathized with the voices, that understood their desire to be free, to break free from the confines of this ancient prison. The path before me was clear: return to the surface and leave the forest behind, allowing the guardian to continue its eternal watch, or release the shadows and the power they held, risking the unknown consequences of such an action. My heart pounded in my chest as I weighed the options, the orb in my hand pulsing in time with my racing heartbeat. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, the gravity of what I was about to do. There was no guarantee of what would happen if I chose to release the shadows, no way of knowing if I would survive the aftermath. But the voices were relentless, their pleas echoing in my mind, tugging at my sense of compassion, my desire to do what was right even if the right thing was unclear. "You were brought here for a reason," the voices whispered, their tone shifting to one of persuasion. "You are the key to our freedom. You have the power to change everything." I looked down at the orb, its light now faint and flickering, and then back at the shadows that surrounded me. I could feel their anticipation, their hope, as they waited for me to make my choice. The guardian's presence loomed over me, a silent reminder of the ancient duty it had fulfilled for millennia. With a deep breath, I made my decision. I reached out, placing the orb back into the indentation at the center of the altar. The carvings flared to life once more, the symbols shifting and twisting as the energy within the chamber surged to a crescendo. The shadows around me drew closer, their forms coalescing into a single, massive shape that towered over me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Release us," the voice commanded, now a single, unified entity. My hand trembled as I placed my other hand on the orb, the energy within it thrumming with a power that I could barely comprehend. I could feel the shadows pressing against my mind, urging me to act, to release the power they held within. And then, with a final surge of resolve, I made my choice. I withdrew the orb from the altar, its light flaring brilliantly as the carvings on the platform shifted one last time. The chamber trembled, the ground beneath me cracking as the energy within the orb was released, flooding the room with a blinding, searing light. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissipating as the light consumed them, their voices fading into nothingness. The guardian's presence surged forward, filling the chamber with its ancient, overwhelming power, and I could feel it reaching out, grasping hold of the energy that had been unleashed. There was a deafening roar, a sound like the tearing of the very fabric of reality, as the guardian drew the power into itself, sealing it away once more. The light from the orb dimmed, then vanished entirely, leaving the chamber in darkness. I collapsed to the ground, my strength drained, my mind reeling from the sheer force of what had just occurred. The shadows were gone, their presence erased from the chamber, and the guardian's power had been restored, sealing away the ancient force that had threatened to escape. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I realized that I had done it. I had made the choice, and the forest, and the world beyond, had been spared the consequences of releasing an unimaginable power. But the cost had been great. The forest was silent as I made my way back to the surface, the path now clear and unchanging. The trees stood tall and still, their branches no longer twisted into unnatural shapes, their shadows no longer moving of their own accord. The whispering voices were gone, leaving only the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind. When I finally emerged from the forest, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. I turned back to look at the trees, now bathed in the golden light of dusk, and felt a deep sense of finality. The forest had returned to its slumber, the ancient entity within it once again contained. But I knew that it would always be there, waiting, watching, and that one day, someone else might come, drawn by the same call that had brought me here. And when that day came, they would face the same choice I had made, the choice to release the shadows or to keep them locked away, their power hidden from the world. As I walked away, the weight of the orb now gone from my hand, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The forest had changed me, had shown me the depths of its mysteries, and I had emerged stronger for it. But I would never forget the voices, the shadows that had once haunted my steps, and the ancient guardian that watched over it all. And I knew that the forest would never forget me either.